Nathaniel Nate Fields, stepped off the gritty city sidewalk and into Club Blue Note, just as the neon last call sign flickered above the bar. He brushed a stray lock of his untamed dreadlocks from his face and balanced his vintage saxophone case in one hand. The interior smelled of smoky bourbon and worn velvet, and muted conversations wove through the low light like a slow saxophone solo. He approached the stage door, where a polished manager in a tailored blazer raised an eyebrow at his faded denim jacket and scuffed boots. "Evening," Nate said, lifting his chin in greeting. His heart thumped as he balanced anticipation with the cool confidence that had carried him through countless jam sessions. "I'm here about that open slot for tonight's set. I've got a new arrangement of Coltrane you might like." The manager's eyes flicked to Nate's hair, coiled into long, free-flowing dreadlocks, then to his mismatched shirt and tie, an ensemble that spoke less of conformity and more of personality. He gave a tight, polite smile. "We appreciate the passion, Nate, truly, but our crowd expects a certain presentation." He paused, choosing his words. "Your style, your look. It doesn't quite fit the club's image. Maybe check back another time." A hush of disappointment settled in Nate's chest. He'd honed those riffs until his fingers bled, practiced bending notes into emotion, poured decades of family gospel and street corner blues into every phrase. Yet here they weren't judging his sound at all, but the texture of his hair and the cut of his clothes. He nodded once, a controlled exhale of frustration. "Understood," he said softly, his voice steady, despite the sting of rejection. "Thanks for your time." Nate closed his case with deliberate calm and turned toward the exit, the club's warm glow receding behind him. Outside, the night air felt crisp against his skin, as if nudging him forward. If one stage refused him, another awaited, one that wouldn't demand he sacrifice his identity for an audience. And though the door to Club Blue Note had slammed shut, Nate felt the first flicker of resolve. He would find or forge a stage where his music and his style could stand together, unbowed. Under the hush of pre-dawn, Nate made his way to the old ocean pier, its wooden planks bleached by salt and sun and creaking with each gust of sea breeze. He carried his saxophone case like a lifeline, the salty air tangling in his dreadlocks as he set down a battered amplifier and a single folding stool. Behind him, the horizon glowed faintly, promising the sunrise that would soon gild the waves. He plugged in and took a steadying breath, the circuitry of the amp humming to life. Then, eyes closed, he lifted the sax to his lips and exhaled a long, wavering note that tasted of brine and longing. The sound rolled out across the water, intertwining with gull cries and the soft slap of waves against pilings. His first melody, rich and unhurried, wove the pier's solitude into song. The story of fishermen hauling nets in the cold dawn, of early morning joggers greeting the day, of hidden hearts seeking solace on creaking boards. As he eased into a more urgent riff, commuters crossing the pier slowed, drawn by the resonance. A line of early shift workers clutching thermoses paused in mid-stride, nodding to the rhythm as if recognizing an old friend. A lone cyclist dismounted and leaned against a railing, sunglasses reflecting Nate's silhouette against the rosy sky. With each breath and bend of his notes, he sculpted the rising sun into music, each phrase a brushstroke of gold. When the melody soared, he stepped into a blistering solo that echoed John Coltrane's spirit, but carried the grit of curbside sermons. His fingers danced on the keys, unleashing a torrent of improvised cadences that spoke of every jazz club he'd been shut out of, every stage that had dismissed his look before his sound. The pier became his sanctuary, each post and cleat a silent witness to his defiance. Midway through the set, the amplifier crackled and cut out, an unplanned interlude that threatened to silence him. Without missing a beat, Nate lifted the sax and played on unamplified, his notes spiraling upward, cutting through the breeze like a lighthouse beam. The sudden vulnerability electrified the moment. Commuters stopped their conversations, the cyclist set down her phone, and even the seabirds hushed their calls. When the amplifier flickered back to life, its reassurance brought a deeper resonance to his closing chorus. He poured every ounce of his resilience into those final bars. crafting a melody that felt both triumphant and tender. As his last note faded into the foam-kissed air, an unexpected roar of applause erupted down the pier. Hands clapped, shoes stomped, and voices cheered, uniting in celebration of music that refused to be confined. Nate lowered his sax and scanned the gathering faces: dock workers in rain jackets, tourists with cameras, teenagers in t-shirts, a handful of musicians who recognized kinship in his tone. No velvet ropes hemmed him in, no cover charge barred entry. Here, on that sunlit pier, his style and his sound melded into something unstoppable. Packing away his gear, he realized he had done more than play a tune. He'd broken every rule that said he didn't belong. And in the echo of those waves, he'd found a stage wide enough for his music and his identity to dance together. By midday, word of Nate's Ocean Pier performance had spread like wildfire through social media. A commuter's shaky smartphone footage, his saxophone drenched in sunrise glow, every note riding the salt breeze, had been uploaded under the hashtag Pier Jam Revolution. Within hours, jazz aficionados, street musicians, and curious tourists alike were flooding the comments. "This is the sound of freedom. He just rewrote the rulebook. Who needs a permit when the whole world is your stage?" A dozen local blogs ran head-to-head comparisons between his impromptu gig and the sanitized sets at the city's top clubs, lauding the raw emotion that could never be bottled by velvet ropes. Back at Club Blue Note, the manager and the booking director huddled around a laptop in the back office. They watched viewers count into six figures, dozens of comments begging the club to bring Nate in, uncancel that gig, and let him stomp your stage. The club's no dread policy, long justified as protecting their classic image, suddenly looked like a relic, a self-inflicted barrier between them and the city's pulse. Calls came in from local promoters offering to underwrite his performance fees, from festival bookers who wanted to fly him to 2 continents this summer, and even from city council aides exploring how to relax permit rules for musicians playing in public spaces. Nate sat at home, scrolling through the tsunami of notifications. Messages from old jam session colleagues turned supporters, emails from small labels offering demo deals, and an official letter from the city's Arts Commission, inviting him to serve on a committee to rethink live music regulations. He felt a swell of vindication. Every jazz club that had once turned him away for his style now had to watch as his music rewrote their own policies. By evening, a formal statement appeared on Club Blue Note's website. In light of Nate Fields' extraordinary demonstration of artistry and community spirit, we are pleased to announce a revision to our performance guidelines. Effective immediately, artists of all styles and looks will be welcomed, without restrictive appearance clauses. The club promised an open mic showcase the very next Friday, headlined by himself. When Friday came, Nate returned to Blue Note, this time under the low haze of cigar smoke and applause. As he raised his sax and launched into that same sun-kissed solo, the audience rose to their feet in a single, thunderous cheer. In that moment, it wasn't just his playing that broke the rules. It was the unmistakable sound of an entire scene transformed. When the city's Cultural Affairs Office realized that Nate's sunrise sax had become the talk of every borough, from the subway tunnels to the waterfront boulevards, they convened an emergency session in the council chambers lined with walnut paneling and framed heraldry. Council members, urban planners, and representatives from every arts organization sat around a semicircular dais, their faces illuminated by the glow of tablet screens streaming number Pier Jam Revolution clips. Nate was invited to share his experience firsthand. He stood at the podium, his dreadlocks catching the warm light, and described in vivid detail how a handful of wooden planks and an old amplifier had become a stage more powerful than any permit could authorize. He spoke of the hush that fell over the pier as his first note lanced through the morning mist, of the commuters who halted their routines to listen, and of the moment the amplifier died, yet his unamplified solo rose louder than the silence itself. His words, spoken with the same passion he poured into his music, gave life to every overlooked corner where art had no official sanction. As he spoke, the planner in charge of public events took frantic notes, her pen racing across meeting minutes that until now had only codified noise ordinances and cover charge requirements. A seasoned councilwoman rose to applaud him, not with polite handclaps, but in a standing ovation that rippled through the chamber. She then proposed an amendment. All public spaces within the city's waterfront and transit corridors would be designated open passage performance zones, exempt from traditional permit fees and time restrictions for solo performers and small ensembles. The narrative echoed off the marble walls. Art belonged everywhere, not just where permit brackets dictated. Discussions swelled as council members debated the details. Decibel levels measured by city-issued meters, liability waivers simplified into a single signed form, and a small grant fund to help purchase portable sound equipment for emerging artists. Proponents cited Nate's viral performance as proof that the city's creative spirit thrived in the unlikeliest places. Opponents, wary of unregulated busking turning into late-night raves, found themselves persuaded by the stories of everyday commuters, transformed by a lone saxophone. By day's end, the new ordinance passed unanimously. The mayor himself declared open passage a cornerstone of the city's cultural revival, promising to preserve every corner where dreams had once echoed unheard. Nate stepped out of City Hall into the afternoon sun, his heart buoyed by the knowledge that the same city which had once judged his look and silenced his music was now ensuring every street, plaza, and pier could become a stage. And as he lifted his saxophone to his lips on the steps of the building, the first note rang out not just as a melody, but as a promise that art would flourish wherever someone dared to play. The Friday night open mic at Blue Note Marquee beamed like a beacon as Nate Fields walked through the club's doors for the first time without hesitation. The velvet ropes were gone, replaced by a simple "Tonight's Lineup" chalkboard propped beside the stage. He nodded to the new host, a fellow musician whose dreadlocks and patched denim mirrored Nate's own style, and strapped on his sax. As the room filled with curious faces, regular customers, street performers, even city council aides, Nate launched into a set that wove together the sunrise riff that had galvanized the pier with fresh improvisations shaped by the club's warm acoustics. Each note landed like a declaration. The walls once closed to him were now reverberating with his unedited truth. The audience leaned in, snapping fingers in time, and by the final crescendo, they rose in a spontaneous ovation that rattled glasses on the bar. Behind him, the open mic sign glowed. Next up, your turn. One by one, poets, rappers, guitarists, and a shy flutist stepped onto the same platform that had once rejected Nate's look. There was the spoken word artist who had watched his peer performance on her lunch break, the punk bassist who had booked herself onto the city's new busking map, and a gospel quartet whose harmonies filled every corner of the room. Each received warm applause, no auditions, no dress codes, just appreciation for their craft. Over pints of amber ale between sets, Nate heard stories of other venues adopting similar nights. A coffee house under the viaduct, a rooftop bar overlooking the waterfront, and even a local theater's alleyway entrance. Musicians and poets exchanged business cards and social media handles, forming a loose collective called Stage Without Borders. They planned pop-ups at transit hubs, park benches, and neighborhood block parties, each event bearing the city's new permit-free branding. By midnight, Club Blue Note's general manager, now sporting a pair of worn boots and a canvas jacket, raised a toast at the bar. "To Nate," she said, voice thick with emotion, "you reminded us that music isn't about the look of the stage, but the soul of the song." Glasses clinked, and in that moment, Nate realized his fight had done more than open a single door. It had cracked the foundation of an entire scene. Walking home under the glow of street lamps, Nate understood that the city's soundtrack had changed. No longer would style gatekeep talent, nor permit fees silence voices. Every street corner, every club, every pier was now a potential stage, ready to welcome whoever dared to bring their truth to the mic. And as the echo of midnight saxophones faded into the night, Nate felt the city itself breathe in time with his own unwavering rhythm. Months later, Nate found himself leaning against a lamppost on a rain-slicked corner near the old pier, watching as a small crowd gathered beneath a hastily strung banner reading, "Stage Without Borders presents Rain or Shine Jam. Musicians, poets, and dancers took turns under a patched-up tent, no bigger than a backyard canopy, but their energy filled the night air like a grand concert. Nate closed his eyes as a violinist wept through a soulful solo, then snapped his fingers as a rapper wove a firecracker rhythm about streetlights and second chances. At one point, he slipped behind the soundboard, a repurposed speaker from Club Blue Note, and fine-tuned levels for a local gospel trio whose harmonies soared above the patter of rain. Parents held umbrellas over toddlers dancing to the pulsing beat, and skateboarders wove circles around the makeshift stage, their boards clicking in time with percussion. A street vendor rolled by with steaming cups of gumbo and sweet potato beignets, the aroma weaving into the music like another instrument. Halfway through the night, city officials arrived, jackets unbuttoned, notebooks in hand, to observe the pilot public arts program they had championed in council chambers. They watched skeptically at first, but as the rain eased and the crowd's applause washed over the performers, their frowns melted into smiles. One aide scribbled furiously on a yellow pad. Permit applications simplified, noise limits extended for cultural events, grants earmarked for artists who brought communities together under any weather. When Nate climbed back on stage to close the evening with his signature sunrise riff, adapted now to Pour from Midnight, that same crowd erupted, their cheers echoing against the damp concrete. He felt the spray of applause like rain on his skin. As the final note lingered, he spoke into the mic without music. We don't need fancy permits to share our stories. We just need space and each other. In the days that followed, the city's website announced a permanent open passage calendar, listing weekly jams at piers, plazas, and tunnels, all free and open to anyone with a song in their heart. Nate watched buskers set up without fear of fines, spoken word artists claim subway mezzanines, and dancers transform empty lots into celebrations of movement. What had begun as his own defiant solo had become a citywide chorus. And as he walked beneath the glow of street lamps toward his next impromptu stage, Nate knew that every corner of his city was now a canvas, and every voice a brushstroke on its living, breathing mural. Years after that first sunrise riff, Nate returned to the Ocean Pier, not as a rebel with a sax, but as a guest of honor at the city's inaugural Pier to Plaza music festival. The old wooden boards had been reinforced and fitted with subtle lighting, though they still creaked familiarly beneath his boots. A banner overhead read, "Open passage from pier to stage," and a crowd of thousands stretched back toward the boardwalk, a tapestry of families, street poets, jazz purists, and curious tourists. Nate climbed onto the main stage, still marked by a single amplifier and his beloved vintage sax, and surveyed the faces shining under festival lights. Behind him, percussionists tapped cajons, a string quartet tuned in the corner, and a DJ blended downtown beats into an urban symphony. He felt the electricity of countless performances that had blossomed from his midnight jam. Subway stations alive with brass, alleyways echoing with scat, rooftops resonating with drum solos. Every step he'd taken since that rejection at Club Blue Note had expanded the boundaries of where music could live. He raised his sax, closed his eyes, and exhaled a long, liquid note that rippled through the assembled throng. Then he launched into the melody that had first stirred the pier's salt air, each phrase now enriched by harmonies from the ensemble behind him. The crowd responded with waves of applause, their energy lifting every note higher until the melody seemed to hover above the pier like a living ribbon of sound. After his set, Nate stepped down and joined the mayor and the cultural affairs director in a small tent backstage. They presented him with the city's new Creative Freedom Award, a hand-forged plaque shaped like a saxophone, recognizing his role in rewriting performance regulations and igniting an artistic renaissance. The mayor thanked him for tearing down every fence that kept culture hidden, her words echoing the sentiments of permit reforms, grant programs, and satellite stages now dotting every neighborhood. As the festival's final act, a massive jam session open to all began. Nate moved through the crowd, encouraging a teenage trumpeter whose first solo trembled with nerves, offering a nod to a spoken-word poet whose verses danced over the mix, and sharing stories with an elderly blues guitarist whose eyes misted at the sight of a new generation carrying forward the music. When the moon climbed high and the last chord faded, the pier fell into a contented hush. Nate stood at the water's edge, Sax resting at his side, and watched his city, once divided between sanctioned stages and forbidden corners, now celebrating its music everywhere. In that quiet moment, he understood that his journey had done more than open doors. It had transformed every street, tunnel, and waterfront into a stage without borders, where every artist could bring their style, their voice, and their truth. And as the tide lapped the pilings beneath him, Nate felt the pulse of a city finally in tune with its own creative soul.